Patrick, here we are. We're in the presence of a veteran, a 15-year veteran in the world of private funds, in the world of using private funds as a real estate investor herself. Susan, when do you think it's appropriate for people to sort of use private funds versus traditional funds? And sort of tell us about that. And just give us a quick overview on you and your company, Private Money for Mortgages.
Well, first and foremost, with that name, obviously people can tell it's private lending that I do. As a mortgage broker, technically I could be doing all mortgages, but I don't. I purposely chose to just stay in this space, mainly because I feel it's where I can best help people. I know what I'm doing as a lender, because I've been a lender for a very long time, and I know what I'm doing as a borrower, because I've also been borrowing for a very long time. So my role is to be a matchmaker. That borrower calls, I listen to their story, I help them figure out what they maybe need to do next, because sometimes people don't know. In fact, many a times I send them right back to a regular mortgage broker with institutional lenders first, exhaust that, and then come back to me if and only if they need the private money, because it's a last resort. It's too expensive to be a first resort.
But Susan, you make a really good point there. You're talking about too expensive. So why would anybody, and we got two sides of this equation. Of course, the Real Estate Investment Network for almost 30 years has been teaching and guiding people to invest in real estate. But we also have a conversation around homeowners, especially these days, about getting financing, given what's going on in the world with COVID and all of the new games that we're playing, new mortgage rules. So we've got two conversations. One is homeowner investor and the other is real estate investor. Okay, very traditional. We've been doing that for a long time. But what you just said is private money is expensive. So why is anybody looking at using private lending to purchase a piece of property?
Well, it's actually, just because it's expensive, it doesn't mean that it can't help. In many situations, it opens the door. So somebody, let's say they're buying a property that the bank won't touch it because it needs a lot of work. And yet they know they're getting it at this great discount price. What do? Well, they use private funds. Then they fix it up, now go back to the bank, refinance it. Or the homeowner that you just talked about, that they want to refinance right now and take advantage of those low rates that are out there, but they can't because their debt ratios are all out of whack. So they might use private money to clear up do debt consolidation, take out a second mortgage. Is it expensive? Heck yeah. It's 12, 13, anywhere between 10 and 15% interest rate just for that alone. However, if they run the numbers, they'll see it's worth their while to have done that, get all their ducks in a row, be totally now able to qualify with the bank because they've cleared up all their credit cards and stuff. So that was cheap money in the end for what they were trying to accomplish.
So this is such an interesting conversation, JG and Susan, because we've played this game a long time, and this is so critical. This is about having a plan, understanding the math behind it, because you didn't just arbitrarily, because you're right, it's expensive money, but when you put a plan together, understand what your exit is, not out of the property, but out of the high cost money. Then guess what? Then you get to take advantage and to kind of work the system in your favor. JG, we just did a Missing Millions segment, and we talk about that with homeowners and with real estate investors, is that this is really about planning, looking into the future where real estate's going, look at the deal you got. And so private money can make sense in many, many cases, but you have to do the math. Take the emotion out of it, do the math.
And expensive doesn't mean not worth it. Expensive just means expensive, and that's it. So what's fascinating about this, Susan and Patrick, and the three of us can appreciate it because combined we've been doing this for 100 years. And when I say that, Susan, you and I have been at it. Patrick's been around for I've been doing it a long time.
Forever, I know.
But my point is this: oftentimes when in our case, we've been doing this a long time. We're very comfortable, and when you're on the outside looking in, you can often feel like, wow, would I ever spend 10, 12, 15% on private money? I don't see how there'd be a time when I can do that. But after doing this so many times and it really taking off the stigma off of, private funds, Susan, it opens up the door to so many deals, so many possibilities, so many avenues in real estate that, and all you have to get over, in fact, is the stigma of it being scary. That's really what it's about, isn't it?
Yeah. Yeah. And in fact, I mean, with many of your different presentations with creative financing, showing people different ways, I've done all of those different things. I've done agreements for sale. I've, do the VTB, like do all these different things. But at the end of the day, I'll tell you, sometimes the easiest thing to do is just borrow the money privately.
Well, okay, so you hold on. You're now into a whole other conversation, which I didn't really want to get into. But this is so important, Susan. Patrick, you've been doing this a long time, so you know that one of the most expensive money on the market by far is JV money, where you have two equity partners. That is the most expensive. Yeah. You're going to pay 50% plus in that case. So if there's a lot of people who are willing to do JVs, and they don't actually understand how much the JV is costing them versus if they would have borrowed that money at 8%, 10%, 6%, 12%, it's actually way cheaper to borrow the money. Susan, you're absolutely right. That's a pro move right there, Patrick.
Well, and you gave it a perspective that many real estate investors don't have. They look at it and they go, because you just gave it the perspective. A joint venture partner charges you 50% of the equity in the property on top of it, right? So it's like, holy cow, that's really expensive. Now, I'm not saying don't get a joint venture partner, but once again, when we take into consideration that perspective, you realize that 10, 12, 15% short-term, expensive money will often make far more sense than even getting a capital partner in the deal if you can. So, there's just a different way to look at it, and we always have to do the math. I keep going back to do the math. But, Susan, you brought it up earlier. What's your exit strategy from both either the property, but primarily what's your exit strategy from that private lender's cash? That's why, JG, you do it for renovations all the time because you know what your exit strategy is going to be. You know what the timing of exiting from that short-term cash so that you can get into mainstream banking and get the much, much lower interest rate.
Patrick, what you said earlier, though, can I just add to it with Please. The JV partner? I don't discourage people from getting a JV partner, but I suggest to them, do it later. Pick up the property with the private funds, assuming that you can come up with the down payment. And there's creative ways to do that too. That's a whole other topic, right? Yeah. So they get the property, they get it fixed up. Now they're going to go to the bank and get it refinanced at a higher amount. That's if they truly want to hold that property and can't do it on their own merits, then bring in a JV partner at that new amount. And they pulled everything out plus. They make money on that itself.
JG, that's just another pro move, right?
I know.
We should have put this on our Missing Millions segment.
I know. I hope you guys are paying attention, folks, because that was absolutely brilliant. Now, Susan, when we were talking just before this, you talked about kind of what I'm going to call 3 keys to success with private funds. Could you kind of to walk us through those 3 keys? Well, the story you were talking about, the story.
Yes. Okay. So that's the main thing. When somebody calls me, and I do encourage people if they have a scenario, they're not sure what to do, because that's quite often the case. Let's talk about it. Let's brainstorm, because there's more than one way to do things, right? So the biggest thing I'm looking at is I need to know their whole story. So we hear the whole story. Then we're also talking about the property. Okay, where's it located? What's the marketability of it? Then the third thing, and I'm not going to say it's the most important, but it is as important as the other 2, is the exit strategy. Because if you don't have an exit strategy, you could lose your shirt. Like you could lose the property because you can't stay in expensive money for long term without losing a lot of money.
And what's interesting about that is the exit strategy. A lot of people think, I need to know the exit strategy for the lender. That's true, but you actually need to know the exit strategy for your own benefit. The lender just wants to make sure you know what the hell you're doing so that they feel confident in lending you the money, right?
Yep. And actually, speaking of that, I'll just twigs ideas as you're mentioning things. The most common thing that we tend to see with investors is using private money to buy properties, fix them, renovate them, sell them, or refinance. Correct? Like that seems to be common, and that is a huge part of my business. Where was I going with that? That to say with it that the exit strategy on that, if they know ahead of time. Oh, I did. I'm sorry.
Well,
I lost my thought.
I think where you're going, Susan, is you need actually more than one exit strategy. You need a plan,
Yes.
plan B, and plan C.
Yes, yeah, that's where I was headed. Sorry, my brain went elsewhere there. That they have to think about all of the different things, and even though they may want to sell after, let's face it, I mean, it could end up that, oh, it's not a good time to sell. Well, what's my plan B now? And
Yeah.
then plan C. So it, there was something else I was going to say, and I totally
There's
lost
so
it.
much pressure on Facebook Live, Susan.
It'll certainly come back to you, Susan.
Yeah.
Now, one of the, I think the creativity, Susan, again, if I remember once being on the outside looking in and thinking like, wow, these people, they just get all these deals done, and I seem to be running up against challenges. And I think that you, Susan, are one of those pros, one of those experts, one of those people that I have Susan on speed dial. If I get run into a deal and I'm not quite sure how to creatively make it work, Susan, you should be one of the phone calls that people make to you to say, how would you creatively do this deal? Not only do you have all the experience, but you have access to source of funds that they maybe have not thought of, like RRSP mortgages, for just one example. Can you give us a story, Susan, of something that looked impossible from the outside, but after working through it creatively, it turned out to be a great deal for everyone?
I think one of the one that I can give you that's pretty recent was somebody, and he did actually exactly what was suggested. Called me first. We talked about some ideas, and then he went out because he was of the impression that he's hit a wall, a financial wall with the banks, which is not an impression. It truly happens to us, right? But kind of like, oh, well, I just have to sit and wait. And it's like, no, you don't have to. We can look at other ideas. So I showed him what would happen if he took out a first mortgage. He also had a lot of equity in his personal residence. And I suggested, as long as he's comfortable with it, you take out a second mortgage on it and then turn around and use that money for his down payment and his rental costs. So we just did that as a conversation. About 3 months after the conversation, he gets back to me, and that's exactly what he did. And actually, he recently closed on his mortgage. It's a property in Hamilton. So 2 mortgages. He has a second mortgage on his first property, personal residence, and a first private mortgage on the purchase. And I can tell his fear factor has gone right down because he's got knowledge behind him now of how to do it.
Yeah. Once you do it, once, and you see the power private funds can open up for you. And quite frankly, Susan and Patrick, you guys know this, at real estate investors, you get to a place where banks become not an option after a while, and you have to work with private funds. Like the banks don't, I wouldn't even dream of talking to a bank on a fix and flip project, even a fix, flip, and refi. I don't want to talk to the banks up front. That's way too much work. Let's get private. Let's lock it down. Let's do the renos. We'll deal with the banks in a year or 2 from now. And it's a great way, you can do a lot more deals that way. It's especially those that are thinking like, how do I go full time, or how do I do more deals, or how do I expand my business? I need more capital, because that's the flywheel of this business is capital. This is a great way to do it, Patrick.
It is, and there's a couple things, going forward with what's happening in this emerging future of real estate, just in the emerging future of the world, and what's happening with us right now, JG. We've talked about it already today earlier, which was you've got to learn, unlearn, relearn all of the things that once were, and as you're going into this new kind of future with the banks and the requirements by the banks, you can either let that shut you down, or you surround yourself with the right people, somebody in this case like Susan, and they can, Susan will actually hold your hand, walk you through the process. And that's also about learning, unlearning what you maybe thought in the past, and then relearning, because now you're looking at how do you put a plan together? How do you put the numbers together? And how do you break it down in a way that it does make sense? Because Susan, at some point you're looking at it and you're looking at the numbers the same as your client is. And you're going to say to your client, these numbers make no sense. Don't do this. Or these numbers make really good sense. Here's why. Here's a couple things to consider. That's that learning, unlearning, relearning, all of the things that we need to do as we go forward. And so, Susan, this is why you do a brilliant job of doing what you're doing for so long, and why private money is an option for real estate investors and or homeowners.
Now, Susan, it sounds to me like it's important for investors to get ahead of this. And what I mean by that is, don't wait until you're in a deal, need money, can't finance, and then you call Susan and you're in a bind. It's like, this is coming. You're in a place where you're going to have to start using private funds soon. Get ahead of it. Have a call with Susan. Have a consultation, a debrief, whatever that is. Susan, do you charge for that upfront part, or is that part of the service?
I don't charge. I have had some people say I should, because I do spend probably more time than I should with some people, but I love what I'm doing. So right now, no, I don't. But I will, what you just said there is so key. I just had an email this morning from someone who I had chatted with a while ago, went through all this. They all of a sudden sent me an email today and said, we now have this property, went into detail with it, and it closes on the 27th. Can you help us? And I thought, what? You haven't filled out an application. You haven't done anything. And you want me to be able to close in a week? Like you're expecting your lawyer to be able to do that, plus me find the lender in time? And all I did, I emailed them back. I thought, sorry, no, that's not going to happen. That was the whole point of the call before, to show them you need to be organized. And, so yeah, I'm not a miracle worker, and your emergency is not mine.
That's a good point. But what's interesting about this, Patrick, is it comes down to, again, folks, those of you watching this, REIN members watching this, keep in mind, you're a sophisticated real estate investor. I don't know if that person was a REIN member or not. I'd probably assume they weren't.
I don't think they were.
Don't think they were. Classic. You should actually tell them to become a REIN member.
Hey, I do sometimes. I tell people, you need to get better educated. Here's a route to go.
But being ahead of this curve only looks professional. It only puts you on the right side of the lender, and then Susan works harder for you. Susan, I would imagine, someone who takes preparations, who prepares the documents, sends you what you need, is way ahead of the game. It's organized. It's easy for you. You'd much rather work on that file than someone who's coming at you last minute with disorganized information. It just makes sense. You're just human like the rest of us, right?
Yep. Yeah. And it is. And I will tell you though, on a last minute close like that one, I wouldn't even look at that one. Like I said, right out. But I've had other ones that I have busted myself trying to get it done. And I went, why did I do that? They had plenty of time before. They were out there shopping elsewhere and left it to the last minute for me to do a miracle. So yeah, like some of it, I'm just, it's kind of like my rant right now. Sorry.
Yes. Awesome. Well, this has been so helpful, Susan, and I really appreciate that. So just to summarize, folks, it sounds like there's three keys to getting private funds. Number one, you got to be able to communicate your story, because that's another thing, Susan. Just because you have a story doesn't mean you're able to communicate that story. You got to be able to communicate as an investor that story properly, so that Susan, the broker, can communicate it, right, Susan, to the lenders. That's step one. Step two, you got to have a good property lined up. Susan, even if they have a good story and they have a good exit, if it's a crappy property and it doesn't make sense, no one's going to do that deal.
No.
Got to have a good story, got to have a good property, and you got to have an exit. And that's not one exit, but rather what's plan A, what's plan B, what's plan C. And we talk about that a lot, Patrick, in our various programs at REIN. Got to have those three exits in order to, and then if you come to the table, Susan, with those three things, the odds of getting private financing are really, really high.
Yeah.
Yes. The key is have the right people on the team to walk you through it. Susan, you do a brilliant job of that. You've got a track record for that. It's why you're one of the Real Estate Investment Network's trusted partners. And it's one of the reasons that we love to have these conversations with you, because we always learn something. And that's what happens when you hang out with experts in that space.
Now, Susan, what is it about working with REIN that really turned you on? I know you've been a REIN member for many, many years, but sort of what was it about REIN, becoming a REIN trusted partner, that really drew you into working with REIN members?
Well, first off, I love how organized you guys are. Seriously, I mean, I'm out there networking all the time with different real estate groups. I'm on many Facebook pages, the works, but REIN has never faltered. It's true to what you say you do. You educate people constantly. You stay on top of the latest information, and then you share it with people. And yeah, that I don't know.
I'm sure Patrick's good looks never go.
Oh, of course. I'm sorry. I didn't want to say that. I thought you might blush.
That's great. Susan, thank you so much. I really appreciate it. If you had one thing that you wanted to sort of leave the viewers with, what would it be? And then we'll end on that note.
I think what I said to you at the beginning before we even started, that one thought is for people to not be afraid of the idea of private money, but to embrace it and learn more about it, how it can help your needs, because it truly can. Don't just look at the interest rate. That's so secondary.
And I think one other, and I probably misquote it, but it was something along the lines of, when the banks say no, we'll get you a yes.
Yes. Yeah. I quite often say that. When the banks say no, we say yes.
Yeah. That's
beautiful. In most cases.
Qualified, yes. That's
Wonderful.
Great.
Thank you so much, Susan. Thank you for being a trusted partner. Thank you for serving the REIN community. And we look forward to continuing our great relationship with you.
Awesome. Thanks very much for having me.
Thank you.